Hello everyone and welcome to another Commander Tactics deck tech. My name's Pope. In today's deck tech, we're going to be brewing a fast and powerful Golgari machine with the Zombie Hydra Polukranos Unchained as our commander. Polukranos is a 0/0 costing 2 green-black and enters the battlefield with 6+1 counters on him if we cast him for his normal cost. But if we do cast him for his escape cost, then he'll enter with 12+1 counters instead. If damage would be dealt to Polukranos, instead we're going to remove that many counters, and then for 1 black-green, we can make Polukranos fight another creature. That fight ability is our main focus with this deck, as we want to use Polukranos to mow down anything that tries to enter the battlefield. And of course, to escape Polukranos from the yard, we can pay 4 black and green and exile 6 other cards in order to bring him back. A 12/12 that can fight as often as we have the mana is nothing to ignore and can enable us to completely dominate the battlefield. To get the engine started though, we do have to ensure we embrace the escape mechanic, and that is why we're going to be showing some love to the yard by milling and dredging away some of our spells. Then we're going to focus on Polukranos' fight mechanic and manipulating all the counters that we'll be putting onto Polukranos and the other creatures we play. And then this deck also has several silver bullets that can take us from in the hunt to ahead of the curve just like that. And with some of the more impactful spells comes a bit of a cost, but we still are keeping this under $250. But now let's show some love to the Land of the Lost and embrace all the spells that we'll be casting to give us some escape fodder. Starting off with 3 of the best dredge spells in the game with Life from the Loam, Stinkweed Imp, and Golgari Grave Troll. Life from the Loam is a sorcery for 1 and a green. This is return up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard to your hand, and we can dredge 3. For those of you who don't know what dredge is, dredge means if you would draw a card, instead you can dredge as many as the card states on it into the graveyard from the top of your library. And then if you do that option, you get to return the card that has dredge on it from the yard back to your hand. With all the milling and dredging we're going to be doing with this deck, Life from the Loam is going to help us keep those lands in our hand whenever we need to, make sure we don't miss any land drops. Stinkweed Imp, for 2 and a black, we get this flying imp creature. Whenever it deals combat damage to a creature, destroy that creature. Kind of old school Death Touch, but just worded a little differently. And then Stinkweed Imp does have Dredge 5 on it, so this is going to allow us to mill 5 from our deck into our graveyard and return Stinkweed Imp from our graveyard to our hand. And lastly, Golgari Grave Troll, costing 4 and a green, so a little bit bigger. He enters with a +1 counter on it for each creature in our graveyard. Late game, this is going to be a monster beater. Then we can pay 1 and remove a +1 counter from him to regenerate him to ensure he doesn't get destroyed. And to top things off, he does have Dredge 6, so he's going to help us load up our graveyard whenever we need to. Keeping cards flowing into the graveyard, we have Fauna Shaman, Underrealm Lich, and Deadbridge Chant. Fauna Shaman for 1 and a green, what a great creature tutor. For green, we can tap Fauna Shaman, discard a creature card, and search our library for another creature card, reveal it, and put it directly into our hand. Fauna Shaman is going to help us get those special pieces we needed to really set Polukranos up for big wins. And then we do have Underrealm Lich for 3 black green. We get this Zombie Elf Shaman. It says if you would draw a card instead, you get to look at the top 3 cards of your library. Then you get to put 1 of them in your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Not only is this going to help us load up our graveyard, it is also going to help us find the best cards that we want in our hand to give us the answers when we need. And then if there's any threat to Underrealm Lich getting destroyed, we can pay 4 life and give him indestructible until the end of turn and tap him. And lastly, Deadbridge Chant. This enchantment is absolutely bonkers. For 4 black green, we get this enchantment that says whenever it enters the battlefield, you mill yourself for 10. At the beginning of your upkeep though, you get to choose a card at random in your graveyard, and if it's a creature card, you get to put it directly onto the battlefield. Otherwise, you get to put it back into your hand. Deadbridge Chant does so many great things for Polukranos, filling up the yard and bringing back extra pieces to ensure we have the most card advantage. And then we have 2 artifacts going to help us manipulate and play with our graveyard a little more with Altar of Dementia and Crucible of Worlds. Altar of Dementia lets us sacrifice a creature whenever we want and make a target player mill cards equal to the power of that creature into their graveyard. Alter can be used on our opponents, say they tutor something to the top of their deck, or we know something's coming up that we don't want them to have, we can make them mill it, but we are mostly going to be using this on ourselves to ensure we have stuff in our yard to escape Polukranos with at all times. And then we have the so powerful Crucible of Worlds. You may play land cards from your graveyard. So with all the milling and dredging, we want to be able to get those land cards out, play them when we need them, never miss land drops. And lastly, since this is such a creature-heavy deck, we do want to make sure we have ways to bring them back, and that's why we're running Victimize and Grave Betrayal. Victimize is one of those spells that I think is grossly underrated, only being played in about 11% of all commander decks according to EDHREC, but it says choose 2 target creature cards in your graveyard, sacrifice a creature you control, and if you do, return the chosen cards to the battlefield tapped. For only 3 mana, this is doing a ton of work and can give us an incredible board state very early if done properly. And then Grave Betrayal for 5 black, so a little expensive. Whenever a creature you don't control dies, return it to the battlefield under our control with an additional +1 counter on it at the beginning of the next instep. It's a black zombie creature in addition to its other creature types. We already know that Polukranos is going to be mowing down the competition, so why not bring it back onto our side, and to boot, it gets a +1 counter, which we absolutely are going to be manipulating in this next section. And speaking of +1 counters, let's dive in, taking a look at all the spells and effects we're going to be using to put counters onto creatures, onto Planeswalkers, and then boost them even higher. Starting things off with Kalonian Hydra and Mana Gorger Hydra. These 2 Hydra brethren are going to come down, they've got trample, they're going to be huge, and they're going to help Polukranos kill our opponents as fast as possible. Kalonian Hydra for 3 green has trample, and it enters the battlefield with 4 +1 counters on it. Whenever it attacks, we get to double the number of +1 counters on not only itself, but each creature you control. If we've recently escaped Polukranos and he's sitting with 12 counters on him, Kalonian Hydra gonna double that up, giving us 24 counters on it, which by the way is a one-shot thanks to commander damage. And then Mana Gorger Hydra for only 3 mana has trample and says whenever a player, that's any player including yourself, casts a spell, we get to put a +1 counter on Mana Gorger Hydra. With 1 rotation of Mana Gorger on the field, there's a good chance we're going to be staring down a 6/6 7/7 trampler. And then to ensure we keep the +1 counters rolling, we have a few non-creature spells with Unspeakable Symbol, Hydra's Growth, and the Great Hinge. Unspeakable Symbol for only 1 black says at any point we can pay 3 life to put a +1 counter on target creature. Keep in mind we can activate this as much as we want, but we do have to be mindful of our life total. And Hydra's Growth, a new card coming out of Theros Beyond Death. For 2 and a green, we enchant a creature. Whenever it enters the battlefield, we put a +1 counter on the enchanted creature, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we're going to double the number of +1 counters on the enchanted creature. Being able to target a Mana Gorger or a Polukranos with Hydra's Growth will absolutely be devastating for any of our opponents. And then the Great Hinge costing 7 green, but we're never actually going to be paying that, says this spell costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control, which ideally is going to be 12, so this is only going to cost us a green. Then it can tap for green and gain us 2 life. And if that wasn't enough, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under our control, we get to put a +1 counter on it, and oh yeah, we get to draw a card as well. This card is absolutely insane. Still not sure how this is a real card, but it is going to help this deck immensely. And then we have a few Planeswalkers coming in to support the team with Nissa Vital Force, Nissa Who Shakes the World, and Garruk Cursed Huntsman. Nissa Vital Force, I love this Planeswalker so much because it is a 1-turn clock. For 3 green, Nissa comes down with 5 loyalty. For her +1, we get to untap a target land we control. So not only are we getting one of those manas back, but it is also a 5/5 elemental creature with haste. For her -3, we can return a target permanent card from our graveyard if we need to, but really we want to +1 her, and the very next turn we get to ult her, where we get an emblem with whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we may draw a card. Without any immediate way to do this, Nissa will get to ult, and for every land drop going forward, we get to draw a card, which is just the most insane card advantage. And then Nissa, who shakes the world, who's really making a name for herself in Pioneer and Standard, says whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green mana. For +1, we get to put 3 +1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land. Untap it, it becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with vigilance and haste, and it's still a land. Then if we do get to alter for -8, we get an emblem with our lands are indestructible, and we get to tutor up every forest from our deck onto the battlefield. Put these two together, Christmas Dreamland, we get to ult them both. We're getting every forest out, we're drawing cards off of it, we just won the game. And lastly, we have the new Garrett coming from Throne of Eldraine, comes down with 5 loyalty for 4 black green. Says for 0, we get to create 2 2/2 black and green wolf creature tokens that whenever they die, we get to put a +1 loyalty counter on each of our Garrets we control. For -3, we can destroy a creature and draw a card. And for -6, we get an emblem with creatures we control, have +3/+3, and have trample. The reason I added Garrett into this deck is because there is a real possibility that we play Garrett, create our wolves for defense, and then are able to fight them ourselves with Polukranos. Being able to give Garrett that ability to ult instantly on the very next turn is incredibly powerful and will make our board that much more impressive. And to ensure the counters don't stop there, we do have a little bit of a proliferation package with Plague Mob Beast, Evolution Sage, and Plane-Wide Celebration. Plague Mob Beast for 3 and a green, we get this beast that says tap, sacrifice a creature, proliferate. Not only is this a free sack outlet, but is also allowing us to proliferate. Evolution Sage for 2 and a green says whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get a proliferate. And then Plane-Wide Celebration, slowly becoming one of my favorite cards from the set, says for 5 and green, we get to choose 4 of the options. And of course, we can choose the same mode more than once. We can either create a 2/2 creature that's all colors, return a target permanent card from our graveyard to our hand, proliferate, or gain 4 life. With a bunch of Planeswalkers and +1 counters floating about, Plane-Wide Celebration being able to proliferate 4 times can really just put us over the edge and enable us to close games out. But along with all these great spells, we do have a few select spells that we want to make sure we get out to really enable Polukranos to go off. And that's why we're running 2 very helpful +1 spells with Vigor and Corpsejack Menace. Vigor, if you're not familiar, for 3 and triple green, we get this elemental incarnation with trample, and if damage would be dealt to another creature you control, prevent that damage, then put a +1/+1 counter on that creature for each damage prevented. When Vigor is put into the graveyard from anywhere, we put it straight back into our library and shuffle. With Vigor on the board and Polukranos out ready to fight, every time we fight another creature, instead of taking damage, Polukranos is only gonna get bigger. And then Corpsejack Menace gonna support the cause. If 1 or more +1 counters would be put on a creature you control, you put double that many counters on it instead. So if Polukranos escapes with Corpsejack Menace in play, we're gonna come out with 24 counters, and then with Vigor on board, well, you can just kind of see where that goes. These 2 cards working in tandem with Polukranos make him such a massive threat. And to really take our fight game to the next level, we also have Seedborn Muse and Magebane Armor. Seedborn Muse, at the beginning of each player's untap step, we get to untap all of our permanents as well. This is going to enable us to fight every creature on the board every single turn. Polukranos is essentially its own mana sink, and Seedborn is going to allow us to abuse that ability. But to truly make sure we don't lose Polukranos, we'll also be running Magebane Armor, which says the enchanted creature gets +2/+4 and loses flying, which is irrelevant. But the big caveat is that prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to the equipped creature. This means that every time Polukranos ends up fighting another creature, he takes no damage and instead just deals the damage. This is what we call a bite instead of a fight. 2 insanely powerful supporting spells going to enable Polukranos to get bigger and badder. And then lastly, to ensure Polukranos connects and keeps us healthy, we have Shadow Spear, Whisper Silk Cloak, and then a little gem, Tainted Strike. Shadow Spear is going to give Polukranos trample and lifelink. This is going to keep our life total healthy, but also enable him to power over other creatures and trample in for big damage. Shadow Spear can also make other permanents lose hexproof and indestructible for only 1 mana, and it only costs 2 to equip. And then if we want to get in and try to go for that elusive commander damage, we can use Whisper Silk Cloak that says equipped creature can't be blocked and has Shroud. Not only is this going to keep him safe from pesky removal, it is also going to allow us to attack with no blockers being able to stand in our way. And then lastly, Tainted Strike for only 1 black. If you've never heard of Tainted Strike, you're in for a doozy. For only 1 black at an instant speed, target creature gets +1/+0 and gains infect until the end of turn. This means that if we're swinging with a 9 or greater power creature that does go unblocked, Tainted Strike is going to one-shot that player. With many of these creatures in this deck being able to apex above 9 power, Tainted Strike is going to get in there and kill opponent out of nowhere. But now that we've seen how we are going to get the ball rolling and get those W's, let's take a look at what else we got going on inside the 99. Removal and control in this deck coming in at about 14 different spells, but do keep in mind Polukranos at the helm. He is going to be our removal, he is going to be our control, and he is going to get work done. Card draw and advantage looking good in this deck with about 11 different spells, going to enable us to keep our hand full. Ramp in this deck, you better believe it is doing well. We're in green. We've got about 12 spells, including a couple mana rocks, going to help us get to those big spells faster. And then the power level of this deck I put at a solid 7. This deck is here, it is ready to do work. It has great support and the ability to just go off. Winning with this deck can be broken down to a few different ways. Number 1, we're going to use Polukranos to control the board state and just keep an advantage over everything going on the battlefield. Then we're going to use Polukranos to get in for some big damage, wipe out our opponents one by one with a bunch of aggressive hits. And if we are lucky, we're going to use our boy Polukranos to get in for 21 points of commander damage and kill our opponents out of nowhere. On a serious note, Polukranos is our linchpin in this deck, and he is our main focus. While we do have a lot of great supporting creatures, he is going to be our big bad wolf. A few budget alternatives you might consider: Loxodon Warhammer, Solidarity of Heroes, and Gargos Vicious Watcher. Loxodon Warhammer is going to give Polukranos trample and lifelink to enable for him to get in, but also keep our life total healthy. Solidarity of Heroes, choose any number of target creatures and double the number of +1 counters on them, going to make Polukranos massive. And Gargos, coming out of core 20 Vigilance, Hydra spells you cast cost 4 less to cast. And then if for whatever reason Gargos gets targeted, he is going to fight one other creature we don't control. And do keep in mind, this is an 8/7 body, so a real big boy. And then a few bombs you might consider adding for upgrades: Lotus Cobra, Hermit Druid, and Doubling Season. Lotus Cobra going to help us ramp out insanely fast. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under our control, we get to add a mana to our mana pool. Hermit Druid going to load up our graveyard, tap, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a basic land card, and put that card in your hand and all other cards into the graveyard. And Doubling Season, the icon of counters. If an effect would create one or more tokens, we get to double them, and then if an effect would create one or more counters, you double those. But that is going to wrap up this deck tech. Polukranos is absolutely flying under the radar and is almost dirt cheap right now, so definitely go give him a chance, pick him up, maybe build a deck of your own, and let me know what you think. What did you think of this deck tech though? Are you interested? Does this make you want to build a giant zombie Hydra deck? Let me know down in the comments below what cards I missed. Obviously there's a ton of +1 counter synergies and we just couldn't cram it all into one deck. If you're new here, thanks for checking out the video. New deck techs go live every Friday. And if you want to know when those videos go live, make sure you hit that sub, make sure you hit that bell icon. Everyone coming back and enjoying a new deck tech, thanks so much. I appreciate you guys so much. If you're a Twitter user, head on over there, drop us a follow at EDH Tactics. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and we'll see you for the next one.